Well, thanks everyone for being here. I'm going to show you a little bit about a project I established in 2019 in partnership with a nonprofit. And yeah, this is where you can all get resources and put your expertise to work. So as all of you know, like restoration is a really hot topic right now. And in the tropics, we're really excited and we want to establish a lot of these restoration projects. And there's a whole race right now. And everyone is like trying to compete and seeing who is planting more trees in less time. And I want to say that restoration is not only about planting trees. So that's the main thing you have to remember. However, it's the most exciting way right now to do it. But because restoration is a whole thing, and when we're planting, we're thinking about how we can do this better. People think that adding fertilizers is a way to increase survival and growth. So we're just like, okay, we know all of these from like crops and agriculture. So how about we do the same for all these native species that we're planting? So is this actually working? What are we doing? So after seeing this, I was really concerned. I was like, how with my expertise I can like see if this is actually working or not. Because when you ask the practitioners if this is working, they're like, sure, trees are growing. And I'm like, okay, this is exciting, but is it actually worth it in terms of the cost? Because this is really expensive. So thinking about this, I was like, okay, what do we know about like nutrients in the tropics? What are the nutrients that are like limiting and how we can like transfer this knowledge to practitioners and help them improve their tree plantations. So you can see here in blue that most of the tropics are limited by phosphorus. So you might think that if you add phosphorus, your plants are gonna grow better or they're gonna survive more often. So with that in mind, I was like, okay, how about we test this in a restoration project where they're trying to restore 12,000 hectares of dry forest. And this is happening in southwestern Colombia. And you guys all already know how important dry forests are and how much Colombia has been doing to recover these ecosystems. So with this, we decided to partner with Fundación Natura and Enel Engesa, which is the company that is basically like restoring this land. And we were like, okay, you guys have like all the money. You guys have a wonderful greenhouse. You have been propagating a lot of species. Let's see what you guys are doing is actually working or how we can improve it. So with that in mind, we went to this beautiful land. And if you're from the US, you might think these are pretty and this looks amazing. Well, not really. This was supposed to be a forest. But the issue now is like we have all these like grasses that are coming from Africa and like seedlings are not establishing anymore. So these are the main things that are happening there right now. So according to them, they had a pretty low fertility. This is dry forest, so water is limiting, so seedlings are not being able to establish by themselves, and then they're competing with these non-native grasses. So we went there and we were like, okay, what can we do? So far, what they have been doing is like they have been adding to every single seedling that they have been planting since 2014, 15 grams of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium plus water. And you'll be like, okay, this sounds great. Well, with that in mind, we were like, how about we mix things a little bit? So we were like, let's see if we don't do anything, what's going on with the seedlings? Okay, water is concerning in dry forests. Let's just add water to them and see if it's working. Well, maybe it might be just the fertilizer and not the water because they should be used to not having water. And then we were like, let's do half of the fertilizer plus water. And then let's just think about phosphorus because like so far ecologists or like botanists know that like phosphorus is the one limiting plant growth and survival in like the tropics. So with that in mind, we decided to establish 42 of these plots. And if you guys are thinking about diversity, okay, we only had 11 species, and that might seem pretty low, but for a restoration project, that's quite a lot. And we had a total of 271 individuals in each of these plots, and they look like this when we established them. And this was in 2020. So this was right before the pandemic started. And since then, we have been measuring survival, growth, and the cost. And the cost means every single thing that they have been doing, including monitoring during these like years. But today I'm gonna just show you the results for the next, well, for the last 2 years. So this is how the plots look like right now. Well, let's say right now, but this was like 2022. If you want to know more about this, please, I welcome you to come with me to the field next week, and we can measure all these seedlings that are not seedlings anymore, they're trees. So this is so far what we have found after like 2 years. So let me walk you through this because I know not all of you are scientists or are used to looking into graphs. So here in this y-axis, we're seeing the percent survival. And here are the number of days since we planted the seedlings. Each different color is representing one of the treatments that I mentioned before. And these lines are showing kind of like the trends of like how survival went through the whole like planting process. So you can see, okay, well, seedlings are dying. That's pretty normal. That happens. And we always expect that to happen. But having like a survival of like around 70% for a dry forest is amazing. Like we were doing great. But so far you can see, okay, there's one treatment where the species or like the seedlings we planted are doing better. And that was like when we added half of the fertilizer plus water. And you might be like, okay, this is exciting. But actually like this compared to the control where we didn't do anything, it was not significantly different. So basically, if you don't do anything, these plants are going to have the same survival rate. Okay, but this is just like a general big picture. Let's look into the species because I know you guys are excited about all of them. So before I tell you about the results of the species, I want to walk you through this because we're going to look into multiple like figures that are going to be looking like this. So here, y-axis, same thing, we have survival. And here, we're going to have different treatments we apply. And our species are represented by these different symbols. And you don't have to remember this. I'm going to tell you what happened. And these are the species that are not doing that well. So some of them are actually dying. And yeah, and so these are the three species that are not doing great. So this is like the Spanish elm or Cordialidora. This is the golden trumpet or Andoanthus ocraceus. And this one is the balsa tree or Ochroma pyramidale. And I can tell you why this tree didn't make it. But that, I'll save it for the questions you guys are going to have for me. Okay, great. So we have the survival. We know some species are not doing great. Let's think about the cost. So what's going on with the cost? And as you might expect, of course, when you are adding like nutrients and water, these costs are increasing. And all of this is in US dollars. So just multiply by 4 if you're Colombian or 4,000, and then you can see how cheap the control is. So like this is the cost per seedling, and it's only like $5 for the control, but then like it can go up to like $10 when you just add phosphorus. So to calculate kind of like something that economists think about quite often, and we tend to forget that we should be partnering with them more often. So we decided to like do these like cost effectiveness analysis. So we took basically the cost of planting a hectare of dry forest, which one specific species, and a hectare in these contexts will be almost 1,600 trees. And then we divided that by the survival of the species that we found. And with that, we got the cost effectiveness. And this is how it looks like if you take into account the survival of each specific species. So far, we're seeing that like the cost here per hectare is actually not that different compared to like the cost that we were seeing before. But then we can see that some species are actually super expensive. Like look at this one right here. So it's not the same to plant these species with the treatment of phosphorus plus water than to plant these species with like doing nothing. So if you're thinking about planting these species, it will be worth just to do nothing. Like you should do like zero management. And which one is that species? So that species is Androanthus crassius. And the reason why this species didn't make it is because this species was bought, like they bought the seeds, and we think that they were coming from a different location. Therefore, because this species has a large distribution across Colombia, this population was probably like not from a dry forest, and that's why it didn't make it. So these are a few take-home messages for all of you because your knowledge is actually really important and it matters during this like UN decade. So the first thing is like, okay, more nutrients do not always translate into higher survival, like or growth. And this is what we saw. The species identity. These matters a lot. And you guys have all that knowledge. So please try to partner with these like large scale projects and try to like convince them, especially if you're a guy, that planting species with some specific identities is really important. And like also think about the functional diversity that like Gunther was mentioning, because this is also really important. And something else that Andrew was like mentioning, like thinking about the seed provenance, where are we collecting these seeds? Is it coming from one single tree? Are we buying these seeds? Do we know where they're coming from? And lastly, I want to say something else. I didn't mention anything related to like conservation or like endangered species. So try to encourage them to plant species that are like threatening because they don't think about this that often. They just go out there, they collect the seeds that they saw from this beautiful tree that was just producing a bunch of them, and they were planting just those seeds. So they don't take into account these things, and we're not translating or communicating that message to the practitioners that have the money and the resources. So with that, I just want to thank you for listening to this, and everyone is more than welcome to come and visit this field site. And these are our balsa or chroma pyramidale trees. They're way taller than I expected. And yeah, we're seeing some animals coming, some like jaguars visiting. So it seems like this is worth it.
That was amazing information. Well, thank you. And we definitely have time for questions.
Thank you, Laura, and congratulations. That's fantastic. And I've already got things from that to take back, whether it's more questions or more answers. I think a lot of both. We're doing a restoration project right now, and we're bulking foundational collections for outplanting, and they're done as plants and not seeds for coastal dune restoration. We have a lot of conversations around fertilizing in the nursery before they go out. So that transition from, I'm curious, were your plants fertilized in the nursery and what was the watering regime? Because that transition from nursery to outplanting is how did that impact it's a moment of change?
So yeah, they were irrigated, they were fertilized, they were extremely pampered. But what we did was they were fully exposed to like, it was 100% full exposure to sunlight for like at least 3 weeks. So we were hardening them. But I think that the more you pamper them, the harder it's going to be for them to establish. So we have to be pretty careful about like fertilizing, like even adding like mycorrhizae to some of these soils. And mycorrhizae are not probably the ones that they should be associated with.
Thank you very much for the talk. This is a quick question. We haven't heard from any of the talks anything about the mycorrhizae. And I would like to hear your view about the importance of mycorrhizae in soil composition.
Well, I'm gonna say that also like nitrogen fixers. So we did have a few nitrogen fixers, and it's something that people doing restoration care a lot about. With mycorrhizae, we didn't add anything, and I have soil archives to see how these communities are changing of like the microbiome. I'm gonna collect more soil samples of the mycorrhizae as well, or like the microbiome in 2 weeks. They were using this like mycorrhizae mix, and I saw some species that are not supposed to associate with ectomycorrhizae, associating with ectomycorrhizae. So I feel like we need to be pretty careful. I know we always say like, oh, we need to like explore more what's going on, but like thinking about these associations is really, really important. And I would rather not add anything than to add something that I don't know what would cause to the system. I would say these soils were not in so bad shape. They were okay, but for them, it was like this was destroyed. But it was mostly the grasses, the ones like creating the problem and not letting the seedlings or the seeds to establish.
Thanks. Yeah, I think you were really as one of the only perhaps talk mentioning the provenance and the origin of the seed material. So I was a bit surprised because as we all know, and for example, so I'm from Europe, and in Europe there is also like ENSCONet, and there's large restoration programs, native seed regulations even. So yeah, you can't really apply in natural environment seeds that come from somewhere. Yeah? So this really boggles my mind. And if we think about tropical forest system, and if we think about sort of highly diverse Andean forests where every mountain ridge may have different things, which may have not even a name, or there may be intergressing things like I'm thinking about what your team is also studying, and we're involved in Manya. So this is a big question mark of what you really have. So there may be even some hybrids that are very well adapted to certain slope inclinations, whereas the non-hybrids are not, and so forth. So how can we ensure that the seed material is really local and adapted and suited for the restoration process, unless you have sort of protocols that you take it from the nearest available source geographically?
Thank you. I guess the biggest issue is like we are not working together. Like for us, it makes sense that we need to like know where the seeds are coming from. But for these big nonprofits doing large scale restoration, like they just want to put things on the ground. They're not thinking, or they might say they're thinking, but when you go there, and I invite everyone here to go and work with them, sit down with them and start like asking questions, because that's when you actually know what's going on. Because behind the scenes, a lot of things are happening, but they're not going to tell you. So you just start like asking questions and you're like, okay, I thought this was working, but not really. And something else that we can do is like translating these things. What Marcela was saying yesterday is like, how can we ensure that people are getting access to these things? We have a lot of protocols, and for propagating species, they're in English or they're in Spanish, and they don't even know that these things exist. So they're like creating their own protocols. But like if we find a way to like put all these things together and like make sure that people can access this. I don't know if like Twitter or like Instagram or the platforms for doing that, or like other ones, like kind of like showing that like if we all work together, this can improve and like we can save each other time and money.
One quick question.
Very quickly, do you know anything about epiphytes? So epiphytes coming back.
Very quick.
No.
Thank you so much.